Hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again. Well, now buying vintage lenses can be quite a tricky business. These are, after all, very old pieces of kit now, and there's been a lot of time for faults to creep in. So sometimes you do run the risk of buying something that you're going to be a little bit disappointed with, but by the same token, there's also the chance that you'll get something really wonderful for not very much money. So that's what we're going to look at today. My best lens bargains and my best, or rather my biggest disappointments. Okay, the first two lenses come in a pair, thusly, and they're a pair of Konicas. And here is my wonderful little Konica 40mm f1.8, and here is a Konica something Hexanon 57mm f1.4. So there they are, two lenses, same manufacturer. One turned out to be a real vintage bargain, and the other one turned out to be something of a disappointment. So which was which? Well, I'll tell you, the Konica 40mm was the biggest bargain. This is a beautiful, beautiful little lens. 40mm is a focal length that I hadn't explored before I bought this lens. And this lens actually came with a Konica FS1 camera, an SLR camera from the film days, and this one had a fault. The camera had a fault, so it was being sold very cheap, and I think the whole thing cost about £20 with the lens. And I really, I was looking for another SLR to feature on the show, but I thought, well, I'll give the lens a go. When I took it out, my goodness, it blew me away. The sharpness of this thing, the colours it makes, the focal length just seems to be the right viewing angle for street somehow. It's a very small little thing. It sits on your camera unobtrusively, even with a fairly large adapter. And it's genuinely a beautiful, beautiful little thing. One of the biggest overlooked gems in the vintage lens market. Luckily, it was in nice condition, no fungus, no dust, no scratches. So I got a real bargain there, and that's definitely a keeper. However, its brother lens, or perhaps its sister lens, I don't know, was this Hexanon AR 57 1.4. Well, now this is from the earlier production run. This is from an earlier series of lenses, and when I bought it, I didn't really notice that, and I was expecting similar kinds of colours and results to what I'd got using this lens, the 40mm, which happens to be from the later production run. So that, I think, goes a long way to explaining why this one was a disappointment. It's not particularly sharp, especially wide open, and it does have a lot of optical flaws, which sometimes can add up to a really nice effect. And, this isn't a bad lens. I don't say this is a bad lens at all, but it's just not my favourite. It's not as nice as the Olympus 1.4. It's not as nice as the Nikon 50 1.4. It's not as nice, certainly not as nice as the Canon FD 1.4. And it is a lens from an earlier generation of production when perhaps optical techniques hadn't been quite so refined as they were later on. So this one really was something of a disappointment. It's a nice lens, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's, in its day it was great, and even now it's great, but it's not quite as nice, quite as sharp, quite as punchy in those colours as the later Konica Hexanon lenses were. Okay, this is my next bargain lens, a lens that I was really, really lucky to buy, and I'm definitely going to keep hold of. This one is certainly A keeper. It's possibly my favourite lens out of the lot, actually. It's got a Cosina lens cap on it, but it's certainly not a Cosina lens. Let's reveal what it is. It's my old faithful, the Carl Zeiss Jena MC Flectagon. Not Flectagon. Get your head together, Nigel. It's the Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolar 1.8 50 MC, which means multi-coated. This is from the later production run. There is an earlier zebra body. You'll notice this one is not the zebra body version. The zebra body version, if you don't like radioactive lenses, the zebra body version is radioactive. So if you've got one, I advise that you don't open it. I'm not keen on opening radioactive lenses. Some people don't mind having a radioactive lens in their collection, and I've got one or two, but others are not so keen. So the zebra-bodied version, if you don't like radioactive lenses, that's one to avoid. The MC one is not radioactive, I'm glad to say, and it produces exquisite images. Now, I've talked a lot in previous episodes about why this lens is so nice. It gives fantastic colour, unlike any I've ever seen. It's extremely sharp. It just has an overall look that is quite stunning. Now, I've covered that quite a lot in previous episodes, so I'll tell you why this was a bargain. It was a bargain because I got it cheap. These lenses go for between, well, I've seen them at around £100, going all the way to up to £200. 150 is a fair ballpark figure, I think. I paid, what did I pay for this one? I think I paid about £75 for this one. It was a little bit cheaper than it should have been, so I bought it. And when it arrived, I found that it was full of mould and fungus, and it was a real mess. And initially I was rather disappointed. I thought, gosh, I'll have to send that back. However, mercifully, this lens is very easy to take apart. There's a little ring inside there. I don't know if you can see that. And if you undo that ring with a lens spanner, the front element just pops out. It's quite simple, at least for that first step. And I was lucky because the fungus was only on the first element and the front surface of the second element. So I could clean both of them just by taking out the first element. I messaged the seller and explained that, you know, it wasn't really in very good condition, and what could they do about it. And they did, in fact, credit to them. We agreed on a £35 refund. So I got this lens for £40, which I consider an absolute bargain, plus, you know, an hour's cleaning time with a bit of vinegar. And I reckon that's an absolute bargain. It's none of the mould has ever returned. I've used it and used it and used it, and this lens is definitely a keeper. Possibly my best bargain of the lot. Right, next we have another couple of lenses, another pair, one of shame and one of joy. And they are, you can probably recognise them, I'm sure. They're a pair of Helioses. One is this silver Helios 4413 blade, 58mm f2. This is quite an early one with the 13 blade aperture. These are really sought after, actually. And the other one is the Helios 44-3. This is a much, much later lens from, I think, judging by the styling, probably mid to late 80s, possibly later, something like that. So one of these lenses was an absolute bargain, and one of these lenses was something of a disappointment, and I'll tell you which is which. And the one that was the bargain was this one, the 13 blade silver bodied Helios 44. These lenses are really in demand. These are kind of top of the heap of the Helios 44 malarkey, and with good reason. I've shot lots and lots of these Helios 44 lenses from several different manufacturers ranging from the early 60s right up until the mid 80s. So I've got good experience of this lens. This silver bodied 13 blade is the nicest of the lot. It's this is where things get a bit odd. If you look at the charts, the resolution charts, you'll see that the Helios lenses get sharper and sharper over the years. You know, the different versions of this Helios 44 get sharper and sharper over the years, able to resolve more and more lines of resolution. Comparing these two, where's it gone? Comparing these two, I've found that just simply not to be the case. I mean, I'm not a pixel peeper. I don't zoom in. All I ever do is look at the general feel of the shot. Does it feel sharp? Do the details look sharp? Is it obviously, you know, a little bit soft? This lens is at least as sharp as any Helios I've shot, and probably sharper. It gives nicer colours than any Helios that I've shot, and that 13 blade aperture gives nice round aperture bubbles, or bokeh bubbles I should say. Well, why was this lens a bargain? Well, it was a bargain because I bought it for 30 quid. It was sitting there on eBay and it had been there for days and days and days, and the advertiser said it was in perfect condition except that he'd noticed a tiny air bubble in one of the glass elements. It sounded, the way he described it, it sounded as though the lens had a fault. Well now, I've bought new lenses in the past from the old Soviet photo industry when I was younger, and in fact my first camera, a Fed 4, came with an Insta lens that said it's very common to have one or two tiny bubbles in the glass. It's not a flaw, it's not a fault, don't worry about it. It seems to have been part and parcel of the Soviet photographic industry that there would be tiny little bubbles appearing in the glass. I knew that that was one of the margins of tolerance, if you like, that was allowed to happen and the lens still be okay. So I bought it, and I'm very glad I did, because it's one of the nicest lenses I've ever shot. I've looked down this lens in detail, microscopically. I can't see any sign of any bubbles anywhere. So, sorry, got a frog in my throat today. So whatever the seller saw, I think they were either mistaken or it's just too small for me to see. I don't know, but it doesn't affect images, and this is certainly one of my best lens bargains. A 13 blade Helios 44 in perfect condition for 30 quid. But this Helios is a Helios of shame. This was very kindly sent to me by a viewer, and I was very, very happy to receive it because I hadn't shot a 44-3 before, and this is a 44-3, and it's one of the later versions of the Helios 44. It's still got the same twin ring aperture control there. So one's stepless and one has steps on it. So that didn't change over the years. The coatings changed over the years, and I don't think this lens has very much coating on it. Actually, I can hardly see any coating on this lens at all. There is some. I don't know if you can probably see a bit of purple and blue reflecting in the light there, but there's not very much. And if we compare it to the earlier lens, I hope you can see, I don't know if you can see, but I hope you can see that has a rather different purple, deeper purple coating, and that's the purple coating you want. That's the coating you want on these Helios lenses. So the coatings on this later lens I don't think do as well. It's not as resistant to flare. It doesn't do terribly well in diffuse light. Everything has a kind of a washed out feel. And what I really want to do with this lens is find somebody who'll put a nice coating on the front element for me. So perhaps an independent optician or somebody like that would be able to get a coating put on a lens. I don't know. The inquiries I've made so far have proved to be quite expensive, so I'm going to try and see if an optician can recoat that. I don't know, chuck it in the recoating machine and see what happens. But this lens I wasn't pleased at all with. At least I was very pleased with the lens, but I wasn't pleased with the results because they're just quite dull. They're really not anything to write home about. They're sort of washed out, dull, a bit flat. Not really a patch on the earlier lens. So if you see a chance to get one of these earlier lenses, nice and cheap, grab it. They're absolutely beautiful. Right, we've got 2 lenses to go, and this lens is one of my bargain lenses. It's a very cheap lens. You can buy these lenses for, I don't know, 10 to 15 pounds. They're all over the place. They were made in the millions and millions and millions. They're an old rangefinder lens. They're from the Soviet photographic industry, and it is, here's the reveal, the Insta 61 50mm f2.8. And when I say 50mm, what I really mean is 53mm. It's actually not a 50mm, it's a 53mm. Why is this lens a bargain? Well, firstly, I've got to say, I'm emotionally attached to this lens. This very lens was my first lens. This came from my first camera, a Fed 4. I've still got that camera and I do occasionally shoot it. It's still in good working order after all these years. And this is the lens that came with it. So I've got an emotional attachment to it because it's how I started photography. But that aside, that's irrelevant. These lenses are bargains. They're nice little lenses in their own right when they don't freeze up. This one's got a little bit of, it does need a little bit of lube actually on it. This is the only one I've not lubricated in all those years, was my original lens. But never mind. These lenses are bargains. Because they were made in the millions, they're very cheap, and they will make you a really nice image. They're coated, so they're based on a sort of a pre-war lens design. So what you get is a sort of a pre-war feel with a nice coating on it, an anti-reflective coating to stop that glare. And it's a great little lens. It's really sharp. That's one of the nice things about this lens. If you like sharp, this is proper sharp. Stop it down, it gets sharper, but at f2.8 it's sharp enough to shoot wide open all day. And I've used this lens a lot. It's very small, it's kind of groovy looking. It's got this zebra kind of look with a polished aluminium and then polished metal, or rather painted metal and then more aluminium. The adapter's very thin to go on any mirrorless camera, so it's nice and small on a mirrorless camera. It doesn't sort of overwhelm the camera, and it makes really nice images as well. I like the images that this lens makes. They are all its own. They could come from no other lens. The word that comes to mind when trying to describe them is a sort of a chalky finish. Imagine an image, imagine a photographic image all drawn in chalk. That's what this lens reminds me of. It has that sort of lightness of colour in its colours, the sort of thinness and almost transparent colour feel that chalk drawings have, that very light, fresh sort of feel. And I do appreciate this lens for all its qualities. It's very often overlooked. It's very often considered to be a piece of junk. It's not. It's a very nice little lens. Its only limiting factor being, well, maybe f2.8, you might find a limiting factor. Personally, I find that fine. But the other limiting factor is that being a rangefinder lens, it focuses down only to 1 meter or 3 feet. Now, if you're shooting on APS-C, that distance will effectively increase by, I think, about a third, if I've got my sums right. And do note that word effectively, nothing about the lens changes. If you're shooting on micro four thirds, that distance will effectively double. So it will effectively have an effective minimum focus distance of, what's half of 3 feet? 1.5 feet, half a meter. So smaller sensors bring the minimum focus distance effectively closer. Not actually closer, but effectively closer. It's magnification and optics, it works. Lovely little lens, yours for about 10 or 15 quid. Grab one if you see one, it's well worth adding to your collection. And my final bargain of today is this one. This is another former Soviet lens. You'll probably or possibly recognize it immediately. It's the Jupiter 8 50mm f2, which is a direct copy of the old Zeiss Sonar 50mm f2. So this is a really beautiful lens in its own right. Why was this a bargain? I mean, I've talked about this lens's virtues many times in the past. Why was this a bargain? Well, quite simply, it was very cheap. It came on a non-working Zorki 4 that I bought, hoping that I could get working again. That was a vain project. Of course, I couldn't get it working again. I'm not a camera technician, and a little bit of fiddling couldn't fix it. But I did end up with this lovely lens. It came with this lovely lens, and this is from, I think, 1967. Well, the camera was 67 anyway, and I think this was its original lens. And it's quite simply the nicest Jupiter 8 I've ever shot. This must have been a real good day, made on a real good day down at the factory. This must have been, what, I don't know. There must have been some good news going about in the factory that day, because somebody, everybody, everything's come together. Everything's worked on this lens at every stage of production to make it really nice. The grinding has been beautiful. The coatings have been nicely applied. The geometry of the lens is absolutely perfect. The tolerances are spot on. And it's the nicest Jupiter I've shot. There is a little quality variation in these lenses. There's quality variation in all lenses, in fact, and in all manufactured products, come to that. There is sometimes said to be massive quality variation amongst the former Soviet lenses. That might well be true in some people's experience, but it's not true in my experience. However, there is quality variation, just as there is with any other series of lenses. And with this one, I just seem to have hit the jackpot. Maybe this is the nicest Jupiter 8 lens that ever came out of the factory. Maybe I really did hit the jackpot and win the lottery that day. A beautiful little lens. I bought the wreckage of a camera with this lens on it for, I think it was about £10. This was about 5 years ago, something like that, maybe a little more. And I've kept this lens because I just was blown away by its results. It was better than any Jupiter I'd shot, and it's a lovely little piece of kit. This is a keeper. It does need a service, actually. The aperture ring is getting a little bit stiff now, and when I took it out during the winter last year, there did come a point where that aperture ring didn't want to move, and I didn't want to force it, because if I did, I might have bent or broken something. So we do need a little bit of lube on that aperture ring. The focus gearing helix is nice. I did lube that when I got the lens, but I didn't touch the aperture mechanism. That does now need doing, and I'll have to look about how to do that and see if it's within my capabilities to actually do it. And if it is, I shall do it. A very nice little lens, and one of my best lens bargains. So if you buy a vintage lens that has faults, you might want to think, if the faults are not too big, like, for example, where's it gone now? This Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolar. There was some fungus behind the front element. If you get a lens like that, if you're at all mechanically capable, if you've done a little bit on cars here and there, or if you've done any other sort of mechanical dismantling and reassembly, then lenses are not anything terribly difficult. You do need a lens spanner, which is a sort of a thing with compass points on it. I'll show you actually, hold on. Yeah, so this is a lens spanner, and this is a great tool because it's got sort of flat blade screwdriver ends on one end, and on the other end it's got just points. So what you do is you can see it's adjustable here, so you can undo these screws for whatever width you need. You can turn these bars around, you can take them off, turn them around, position them the other way for if you need to point inwards. So it's a very, very versatile tool, and it's a very cheap tool as well. This one cost me £15 and it enabled me to open up this Carl Zeiss Jena lens and take out the front element. So if you're at all mechanically able, don't immediately reject a lens with a couple of faults. Maybe you can do a deal with the seller and get a little money off if you can repair it, like I did with this one. Otherwise, you can always send it back if it's too much for you to do, if it's too difficult to do, or if you're just not, you're not a mechanical kind of person, then send them back. If you buy a vintage lens that is a real bargain, like this 13 blade Helios, well then I advise you to immediately go out and shoot it. After all, what else would you do with such a beautiful lens? And while you're shooting it, you can really appreciate how little the lens cost, especially when you see the final images. So good luck with your vintage lens hunting, folks. Sometimes you'll get lucky, sometimes you'll get unlucky. If you get unlucky, either repair or send back. If you get lucky, go out and shoot. So that's about it from me for today. I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. Many, many thanks to subscribers. Thanks for your support, and many, many thanks to patrons for your support, without which it would not be possible to make this show in the form that we do. So many, many thanks to you. Also, if you'd like to support this channel, if you think, yeah, maybe this old hippie isn't doing too bad a job of promoting these old lenses, of keeping them in circulation, in maintaining them and keeping them alive, or whatever else you think it is I'm doing, you too can support this channel over at www.patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that for as little as $1 per month. Many, many thanks for watching, everybody. I do appreciate it. And if you're not doing anything too irksome or strenuous next time, then please do drop in for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.